Just a few words of advertisement about the Institute. It's a professional body of forestry or foresters in Australia. It's been operating since 1935, so we've been around for quite a while. And our members include foresters and forestry professionals through a whole range of disciplines. Some people have called me a lapsed forester and a wannabe conservationist because most of my career I moved out of forestry into conservation. And my last job was with Tony. I was the Director of National Parks for Victoria until 2015. But apart from forestry, we also have members that are in land management, members that work with traditional owners, research, education, administration, a whole range of fields that have to do with forest management. We're totally committed to the principles of sustainable forest management, and that incorporates fire in particular. Foresters, I think one of the interesting things about training for people who work in forest is you have a very long-term perspective that's not common with most people. I think our modern lifestyle gets us to think in very short periods of time, and politicians perhaps even shorter, but we're trained to think in hundreds of years. And often short-term or mid-term decisions that are made around fire management or forest management have repercussions that might go over hundreds of years. The disruption in particular of traditional owner burning and their replacement by new fire regimes, added with fragmentation of habitats and very expensive infrastructure that's now inside those habitats, and climate change is a rather toxic recipe that I know all the firers in the room face on a day-to-day basis. And so I'm hoping that this session will give you a glimpse of how those challenges are being addressed, and to consider what else needs to change in southern Queensland, northern New South Wales, to protect life and property, but also to protect the natural and cultural heritage that we have.
We've got a whole bunch of drivers or pushes or influences that will affect how the land managers, people responsible for doing the looking after of country and so on, how those people then achieve the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. All those good things that we want to see for land management, the sustainability, the productivity, the safety, community risk reduction, all those sorts of things are the good outcomes that land managers are trying to achieve in an environment of all these various drivers that we live with, the politics, the financial issues, climate change and all those sorts of things. In between those pushers and those doers, there's a whole family, a large family of groups who assist and support those land management organisations or landowners. One of the angles that the Institute and foresters generally put forward is this multiple use management. It's one of those words that's been used forever, where forests are not just single purposes, single outcomes. They achieve a variety of outcomes. Similarly with fire, fire can often be seen as a one purpose, one outcome activity. It's not so. There's any planned burn, and we're talking about planned burning here. Any planned burn can achieve multiple outcomes and multiple purposes, and that can be done deliberately. It is in reality that a hazard reduction burn or a protection burn does achieve diversity in the landscape and can achieve conservation outcomes. It just has to be recognised. Similarly, you go to a conservation burn or you're burning for a particular species improvement, that does achieve protection outcomes. What we want to do is start the thinking that planned burns are not just one or the other in terms of their purpose and outcome. That by design, you can optimise the outcome of a burn if you recognise that all the various outcomes that a burn can achieve, and by adjusting the way you might light the fire or design the fire, you can actually optimise to a greater degree the multiple benefits that come from fire.
170,000 hectares plus is still burning. We're still rotating crews into Gippsland at the moment. At the same time, as I said, we're trying to really shift into plant burning mode. And I think that typifies one of the big challenges for us as land and fire managers in this current and future climate, is how we actually do both those things. But we also have a code of practice for bushfire management, which really tries to put into a succinct form what our key objectives are. And you can see that the two primary ones there are to minimise the impact of major bushfires on human life and communities, but also importantly to maintain or improve the resilience of natural ecosystems. Now this second one is really critical for me personally. I've been a burn IC for the last 10-15 years. One of the things that's always been in the back of my mind is what is the environmental impact that we're having through conducting these planned burns. Until recently in Victoria, we really haven't had a structured approach to looking at pre and post burn impacts on the environment in a way that matches the scale of our program. That's changing, and I personally find that quite exciting, but we've got a long way to go. You can also see a massive fluctuation in not so much what was planned, but certainly in what was achieved. And being a burn practitioner, I can understand that. I'm sure many people in the room can as well. You can only burn when you can burn safely. You also have to be structured as an organisation to achieve something on this scale, and that's not easy. One of the great phrases that we are now working with is the concept of residual risk. This is not an easy concept to describe in a community meeting. Put simply, residual risk is the risk that we are prepared to accept as a land and fire management organisation to be present in the landscape that reflects the risk reduction that we've achieved through conducting plant burning. Now, if you look at the community where I come from, the maximum risk of property loss if we did no plant burning was estimated at around 2,500 properties. The modelled risk with the fuel management program that we've adopted reduces that down to 839 properties. So we're not saying that we're removing the risk, we're saying there's a residual risk. And that really then is a conversation about how do we manage that and how do we broaden that management out beyond government and into the community. This slide here just gives you a quick snapshot of the fuel management program as we undertook it in 2018. There's some elements in this program that I would highlight that reflect a shift in Victoria's approach to fire management and plant burning. The first is community-based bushfire management. This is really trying to have something a bit similar to the fire adapted communities or the fire learning network that exists in the US being applied in Victoria. We're talking about community-driven grassroots conversations about fuel management in small communities. So this is a big shift for us. We don't know where it's going to end up, but we are already seeing some benefits. So people are looking at the landscape around them, looking at where fuels are sitting on private land, their own properties, and not just looking at the public land as the problem. We are getting more and more buy-in from private property owners on us conducting burns across the private-public land interface, which is fantastic. Again, it takes a lot of work, but if you align this work with our risk modelling, that's where we're going to get the best risk reduction outcome in many cases, rather than just burning public land on rotation.
And part of the challenge we're going to have, and some of the challenges I'll speak of a little bit later in this presentation, is how we justify the works we're doing in light of other pressures, as far as are we actually getting the best return for our effort. And so we're now working on developing our next generation bushfire risk management planning, where we actually quantify the effectiveness of treatment. So quantifying the risk and actually quantifying what sort of return that we're getting from that investment. The other thing we also make sure we do to enable that is our funding program. So we have considerable amount of funds. There's over $8 million a year that's spent based on the priorities that come out of the risk plan to support agencies and brigades to undertake this private burning activity.
Models require accurate data to ensure accuracy and confidence, and 10 Rivers set out to investigate the fuel characteristics across the southeast Queensland. So, QFR's Predictive Services Unit required the information for the use of Phoenix Rapid Fire, and they needed the fuel types, the fuel load profiles and the rates of accumulation. The aim of the study to investigate the characteristics across the southeast Queensland subtropics to quantify fuel load, structure and accumulation across the many broad vegetation groups that we have.
In the Queensland wet tropics, recent research has shown that more than 1,000 square kilometres of open forest and woodland has transitioned to rainforest in the last 50 years in the absence of fire. And many of those eucalyptus communities which are threatened by this process are now listed as endangered EECs purely because of the threat of rainforest expansion. And this diagram here just shows the general structure of a typical open forest, typified by an open canopy and often a dense, diverse ground layer vegetation. In between fire, rainforest pioneers often recruit into and grow in these fire-excluded open forests. Historically, regular fire would move through these forests, top killing or completely killing those rainforest pioneers and removing them completely or otherwise keeping them low in the profile in these communities, being fire maintained. However, in the continued exclusion of fire, these rainforest pioneers continue to develop a dense rainforest mid-story. That increased shade suppresses the ground layer vegetation. Now that's particularly important because most of the floristic diversity in open forest is found in this grassy, but in this ground layer vegetation, as much as 95% in many eucalypt forests. We're still going to need fire to come back fairly quickly for many species.
About our southern pine plantations, of which we have about 148,000 hectares. Loss of plantation asset through fire is identified as their greatest risk. We are fortunate they are a fairly fire-tolerant species, which means we can do some prescribed burning in our plantations under certain circumstances.
Our fuel loads are increasing. We have a loss of our lignotuber pools. If anyone doesn't know what a lignotuber is, understand, because they're disappearing unless we're burnt. And we're having trouble getting regeneration in our forests. The small shrubs and grasses are disappearing in the herbs. The traditional food plants are disappearing. We've got thicker leaf litter, often a more mesic understory. But in other places like Eden, you don't have that thick understory. You've just got the really thick leaf litter and all the understory disappearing. And we've got a lot of difficulty in regeneration. We've got a lot of our problems in relation to our forest, in relation to decline and bellbirds and sillards and mistletoe. A lot of them all go back to this one thing, lack of fire.
So the real question is what we're doing, and for us we've got a goal, and that goal is to double our prescribed burning and then double it again over the next 5 years. And that'll get us up to around that 5% burning across our state. And what we've realised is that we need to link our fuel management with forest health. So these are the burnable categories that we're using now to develop our fuel management planning. And we've got healthy country that we just need to look after. We don't think there's very much of that out there. Most of our country is in this category too, so it's country in transition. It's what we've really got to focus on, because we've got a chance of getting that back to what it should be. And then finally, we've got country that's in decline, it's going to need intensive effort. We're going to park that over there and look at different approaches to that.
Smoke impacts on communities is a very active conversation in Victoria, as I'm sure it is in every other jurisdiction. We are now having to spend more and more time modelling and managing the impacts of smoke from plant burns on settlements and communities. You can't have smoke without fire or fire without smoke. It's just one of those things. So we have to get better at modelling this and working with the community on both getting them to accept that this is the reality, but also trying to burn in a way that, if we can, reduces the impact.
In Sydney, particularly because of the nature of the Sydney Basin and the way that smoke can pool and catch within there, and also the very high population density. Smoke it's quite a major issue for us to consider. Using the AQFX model was developed in Victoria, it's now going to become our national modelling, looking at broader pollutants and looking at what sort of load we can put on particular days. And really what this is helping us do is look at with the scheduling, our timing of burns, size of burns, and how that interacts with the background weather as far as how can we best have that outcome without causing a lot of air pollution issues.
So decision support, tier 1 is like the coming week. So a week, what's going to happen in the next week? Are there going to be any dangerous conditions? Then you've got the tier 2, that's the next couple of days, next few days. What's in the atmosphere currently? What's the existing load of smoke in the atmosphere from fires? Currently you might have wildfires, so what's that smoke, what's the load in the atmosphere? And then as you get closer, so the day before, can I go ahead with the prescribed burn? That's the question we'll answer there with tier 3. So this is just what it looks like. You can toggle things on and off. It's really good design here. I like it better than our Meadow. Meadow's got great data in it, but I like this in terms of the layout and just the look and feel of it. You've got your time range across the top where you want to put the time. You can toggle on bushfires, you can toggle on and off your prescribed burns. Here's your colour-coded, you've got green for your prescribed burns, you've got some dots there for going wildfires, and here's your PM 2.5. You can see that being modelled for that burn, where the smoke and the air pollution's going to go. You put in the date, the location, the size of it, and then you can toggle it on and off. I think you can put 60 burns in, and then you can see here the modelling of what's happening with the critical 2.5 micrometre fine particles and where they're going.
And for me as an Aboriginal person, while I work for LS and I've got LS officers that have to advise local landholders about what they can and can't do and Aboriginal people what they can and can't do, it's important to consider that cultural practices are the domain of people that have cultural authority, and so agencies need to be aware of how they are participating in that conversation, and that's some work that LS has been doing. As we all live in this environment, we all have ways of being which form our own cultural identities and the cultural identity of the community. And traditionally, we had a cultural identity that was a part of the land, which actually maintained that landscape in a way that was healthy for us. We changed it, and we changed it in ways that were beneficial to us, but it also became beneficial to a lot of other species, and we understood that responsibility that we had.
Good fire is a good fire. This indicator here is basically that log's been there on the ground for a long time, well-seasoned log. The fire passed it and it did not even ignite. It was just the grass, that available grassy, flashy fuel burn. There's still patches of green in amongst that, small herbs on the ground. Anything that had any moisture in it didn't actually catch fire, which was good to see. And establish partnerships with agencies and organisations. So I guess everyone comes together, we collaborate, we build capacity to work closely. It's about people who may not necessarily work with Aboriginal people frequently, get an understanding on the protocol and the cultural aspects of country and how close country is to people. We always talk about country sick, people sick. We get healthy country, we can normally get healthy people back.